Kane's treacherous nature is revealed. Phyllis is thrown into prison. The air in Genoa City had always been thick with secrets, backstabbings, and the stewing pressures of those who allowed themselves untouchable. But moment it felt electric in a way that made hearts race and whispers turn into riots. Kane Ashby, the fascinating, sophisticated man who had formerly sounded a loyal supporter to Victoria and the Newman family, eventually revealed the depth of his duplicity in a way that left everyone reeling, their trust shattered into jagged, irrecoverable pieces. For months, subtle signs had refocused to disagreement, lost documents at Newman Enterprises, rumored phone calls behind unrestricted doors, and a growing apprehension in the way Kane avoided direct eye contact but no bone had imagined the compass of his business. He'd been still undermining Victor at every turn, precisely orchestrating deals that favored his particular docket and leaving a trail of consequences that no bone had yet been suitable to completely trace. Phyllis Summers, as vibrant and determined as ever, had been hot on his trail, her investigative instincts sharper than ever, and yet Kane had been one step ahead, manipulating circumstances with a perfection that only someone who had intimate knowledge of the family's inner workings could achieve. The breaking point came during an explosive battle in the Newman boardroom, where documents revealing fraudulent deals, secret hookups, and indeed traces of felonious exertion were laid bare, their ruinous substantiation leaving the room in stupefied silence. Phyllis, ever intrepid, tried to expose Kane on the spot, her voice ringing with the fury of someone betrayed, but Kane's counterattack was devastatingly calculated. Using the chaos he'd sown, he twisted the narrative, painting Phyllis as the agitator, the one whose overzealous pursuit of justice had crossed the line into felonious hindrance. Within hours, the capstone of Kane's deception had Phyllis shackled, attended from her home by the Genoa City Police, and thrust into the cold wave, unyielding walls of captivity. A stark, humiliating fall for a woman who had always fought lifelessly for verity and integrity. Outdoors, the megacity buzzed with gossip and enterprise. Musketeers and foes likewise rumored about the shocking turn of events, wondering how a woman so sharp and flexible could be so intimately entangled by the very man she had trusted. Victoria, scuffling with unbelief and heartache, scuffled with her own judgment as she tried to attune the man she loved with the manipulator now revealed before her eyes, while Nikki Newman quietly pledged revenge, her motherly instincts burned by Phyllis's unjust incarceration. Meanwhile, Kane, in the quiet solitariness of his office, transuded an icy calm, completely apprehensive that he'd struck a blow that would resonate across every corner of Genoa City, but indeed he couldn't prognosticate the lengths to which Phyllis's abettors would go, or the retired forces lurking behind the megacity's flashing skyline, ready to bring justice in the most unanticipated ways. As night fell, the skyline of Genoa City imaged the fermentation within glowing lights over, but murk that hid secrets, falsehoods, and the brewing storm that promised that Phyllis's imprisonment wasn't the end of the story, simply a chapter in a saga where fidelity is transitory, trust is a dangerous adventure, and the line between idol and villain is blurred beyond recognition. For observers, it was a spellbinding memorial of why the young and the restless had charmed generations, because in this megacity, nothing was ever truly as it sounded, and indeed the most precisely laid plans could unravel in the blink of an eye, leaving hearts broken, alliances shattered, and a thirst for vengeance that promised the coming disclosure would be indeed more shocking than the last. The captivity walls were colder than Phyllis had imagined, though she had faced plenitude of rigors before. She hugged herself tightly as she walked down the stark corridor, the metallic wang of her thrills echoing ominously. Each sound felt like a judgment, like the megacity itself was condemning her for Kane's business. She couldn't believe how snappily her life had unraveled. One moment she was fighting for justice, the coming she was a defendant in a case she hadn't indeed started. Her studies contended, replaying every discussion, every warning she'd ignored about Kane's possible treason. Had she been eyeless all this time? Or had her instinct for the verity simply put her in the wrong place at the wrong time? Meanwhile, across city, Kane sat in his office at Newman Enterprises, his hands clasped behind his head, leaning back in his leather president. The dim light from the office beacon cast murk across his face, but his expression was undecipherable, controlled, precise, and eerily calm. He knew the damage he'd done. He'd turned Phyllis's pursuit of justice against her, and with the right narrative, the police, the megacity, indeed Victoria herself could be induced she had crossed legal boundaries. Kane's mind was formally contending ahead, calculating every move, conniving the coming stage of his plan. There was no room for error. One misstep, one slip of emotion, and everything he directed could come crashing down. Back at the police station, Phyllis sat in a small, Argentine interrogation room, gaping at the table in front of her. Her hands were steady, her posture recalcitrant, but outside, wrathfulness and fear disaccorded violently. She could feel the weight of the megacity's judgment pressing down on her, the whispers of treason echoing in her mind. The operative, a man in his 50s with a sharp aspect, paced sluggishly. He placed a train on the table with a soft thud. "Miss Summers," he began, his voice measured but establishment, "we have substantiation that suggests you were involved in manipulating commercial documents. Can you explain your presence at Newman Enterprises during those deals?" Phyllis leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "I was there to uncover the verity," she said. "I've been tracking fraudulent exertion. Someone has been undermining Victor, and you know exactly who it is." "Kane Ashby." The operative raised an eyebrow. "Kane Ashby?" "Yes," she snapped. "He's been orchestrating deals behind everyone's back, trying to gain power at the expenditure of the Newman heritage. I've evidence, but it's buried deep in his lines. I was trying to bring it to light. And now I'm being framed for my own pursuit of justice." The operative broke, studying her. There was an intensity in Phyllis's voice that was inarguable, but substantiation spoke louder than passion in a courtroom. He left her alone in the room, and she drooped back against the president. Her mind contended again, allowing about Victoria, about Nikki, about Billy. Who could she trust? Who could help her unravel Kane's manipulations? Victoria, at home in her extension, goggled blankly at the megacity skyline. She had been blindsided. Kane had always sounded dependable, and yet the substantiation, documents, testaments, and indeed viewer accounts painted a picture she could no longer ignore. Her heart pained, but she forced herself to suppose strategically. She couldn't let Kane win. Not only had he betrayed her trust, but he'd thrown Phyllis, someone she admired despite their complicated history, into an agony of legal battles and public demotion. She picked up her phone and telephoned Nikki. "Nikki," Victoria began, her voice tense, "we need to talk. It's Kane. He's more dangerous than we ever imagined, and Phyllis, she's in captivity." Nikki's voice was calm, but her tone carried the weight of fury. "I know, Victoria. I've formally started looking into it. Kane may suppose he's untouchable, but he's made one fatal mistake undervaluing Phyllis's abettors. Meanwhile, in captivity, Phyllis set up herself thrown into a world that was as cruel as it was confining. She met women who had their own stories of treason, injustice, and survival. Some tried to blackjack her. Others offered a quiet solidarity. In the harsh fluorescent light of the common room, Phyllis realized that survival wasn't just about navigating legal battles, it was about navigating people, power, and perception. She made her first supporter in a woman named Marcia, who had been wrongfully indicted in a commercial embezzlement case herself. "You've got spirit," Marcia said, assessing Phyllis precisely. "But don't let Kane see you blench. Out then, everyone has an angle, and if he's framed you well, you're going to have to fight smarter than ever ahead." Phyllis jounced, determination curling like a spring in her casket. "I won't let him get down with this," she rumored. "Not now, not ever." Across city, Kane continued to pull strings. He called his counsel, who reminded him that while his plans had succeeded in discrediting Phyllis temporarily, the real challenge would be maintaining control over Newman Enterprises and icing that no bone uncovered the deeper layers of his deception. Kane's mind was a storm of strategy, every discussion, every movement, every look calculated to maintain dominance. But indeed he couldn't prognosticate the ripple goods of a determined woman like Phyllis, whose character, though spoiled for now, could enkindle a chain response of exposures, secrets, and alliances that would shake Genoa City to its core. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure escalated. In the courtroom, Phyllis's counsel fought lifelessly, digging through mountains of paperwork and discovering inconsistencies in Kane's claims. The media had caught wind of the story, and Genoa City buzzed with enterprise. Every corner cafe, office, and social event was replete with whispers of Kane's treason and Phyllis's supposed errors. Yet, behind the scenes, Victoria, Nikki, and indeed Billy were still gathering their own intelligence, preparing to strike back and expose the verity that Kane had allowed. He could bury ever. Late one night, Phyllis lay on her bunk, gaping at the ceiling, replaying every commerce with Kane in her mind. She realized that his charm, his strategic mind, and his connections had made him dangerous, but she also realized that the cracks in his facade were there for anyone sharp enough to see. And she had the sharpest instincts of all. The coming morning, a court session began with a tense atmosphere. Kane arrived, composed and trim, confident in the control he believed he'd over the narrative. Phyllis entered shortly after, adjoined by her counsel and many sympathizers, including Victoria, who made sure to sit prominently in the courtroom. The judge called the session to order, and the battle of verity versus deception began. As documents were presented, as testaments were given, and as the full extent of Kane's scheme sluggishly came to light, Phyllis felt a swell of stopgap. Substantiation that had sounded retired or insolvable to access was revealed, exposing Kane's manipulation, fraud, and treason. Every piece fit together like a mystification, painting a ruinous picture that contradicted the narrative Kane had so precisely constructed. The room was tense, the air thick with expectation. As the consummation actualized on everyone present, Phyllis had been right each on. Kane's trim expression faltered, just slightly, a flicker of query betraying the mask of control he'd worn so convincingly. Phyllis seized the moment, her voice strong, unwavering, echoing through the courtroom. "I did what I had to do to uncover the verity, to cover the Newman family, and to ensure justice. The real treason comes from those who hide behind charm and manipulation, and the substantiation proves it." The judge leaned back, absorbing the weight of the exposures. Outdoors, the media content boosted. Genoa City was aboil. Musketeers, family, and indeed former adversaries watched the unfolding drama with rapt attention. Phyllis, formerly trapped and vulnerable, began to reclaim her power. And yet, indeed in the moment of triumph, she knew that Kane was dangerous, that the megacity's shadowy corners held more secrets, further plots, further consequences that had yet to unfold. But for now, Phyllis had reclaimed her voice, her quality, and her place in the megacity she had always called home. The war wasn't over, but Palm had a name, and that name was Phyllis Summers. Phyllis Summers sat on the narrow hut in her cell, the fluorescent lights above fluttering in time with her palpitation. The reality of being confined was suffocating, more so because it wasn't just discipline, it was public demotion. She could feel every tale in Genoa City as if it were a cutter pressed against her back. Kane Ashby's treason wasn't just particular. It had weaponized the law itself against her, and for a moment, she wondered if she'd ever be free again. The small splinter of a window in the corner offered little comfort. She could see the megacity skyline, but it felt like a world piecemeal, one that had moved on without her. Her studies drifted to Victoria. Would she stand by her? Or would Kane's polished facades have swayed indeed her? And Nikki had always been a fierce supporter, but Phyllis knew that indeed the strongest abettors could only do so much. She had to find her own way. And she would. In the touching cell block, whispers began. Some of the convicts had heard of Phyllis Summers, of her life in Genoa City, her beauty, her sharp mind, her social standing. To them, she was a target, a prize, someone whose fall from grace could be exploited. But Phyllis refused to show fear. She had survived far worse, commercial spying, blackmail, romantic backstabbings, and she'd survived this. Her mind began formulating a strategy: observe, acclimatize, and strike when the moment was right. Meanwhile, across City and Newman Enterprises, Kane Ashby sat in the polished comfort of his office, savoring his apparent calm. He poured himself a drink, swirling the amber liquid as if it could dull the excitement contending through him. Kane's business had been regular. He'd studied every weakness, every particular vulnerability, and abused it to his advantage. By turning Phyllis's grim pursuit of justice into apparent felonious exertion, he'd managed to remove a redoubtable adversary from the boardroom and from public scrutiny. Yet indeed, as he celebrated, a faint apprehension dragged at the edges of his knowledge. He was professed, cunning, ruthless indeed, but no bone. Could prognosticate every move, especially in Genoa City, where every alliance was fluid, every friend could be an adversary, and secrets no way stayed buried ever. The storm wasn't over. It had simply changed direction, and he knew that sooner or laterly, Phyllis would strike back. Back in captivity, Phyllis's first days were a whirlwind of intimidation, adaptation, and careful observation. She learned who applied power, who could be trusted, and who would exploit a moment of weakness. One capture, Marcia, came an unanticipated supporter. Marcia had been wrongfully condemned of commercial embezzlement and understood the stakes Phyllis faced. Out then, Marcia rumored one evening, "You need further than smarts. You need a betters, and you need tolerance. Kane thinks he can play you, but he hasn't seen the real Phyllis Summers." Phyllis took that advice to heart. Every commerce came a calculated move. She counterplotted the social dynamics, learning who could impact issues, who was observant, and who was susceptible to manipulation. Every discussion, every regard, every gesture came an indication. She realized she could use the system itself to her advantage, gathering information, establishing disagreement, and laying the route for her eventual exculpation. At the same time, Victoria and Nikki were still marshalling their own disquisition. Victoria couldn't ignore the substantiation that contradicted Kane's story. Deep down, she had no way completely trusted him. Commodity about his charm and conscientiousness always felt too polished. Victoria enlisted the help of Paul Williams, a private investigator with times of experience in navigating Genoa City's murky waters. They began making together a timeline of Kane's manipulations, cross-referencing deals, phone records, and bigwig testaments. The courtroom came the arena where the battle for verity would unfold. Phyllis's defense platoon, armed with substantiation gathered from grim disquisition, began dismembering Kane's precisely constructed narrative. Each document presented, each substantiation evidence, and each subtle contradiction minced down at the facade Kane had erected. The pressure in the courtroom was palpable. Every bystander holding their breath, seeing that the story's resolution could shift the balance of power in Genoa City ever. As Phyllis sat still, hearkening to the proceedings, her mind was a storm of emotion and strategy. She recalled the innumerous moments when Kane had smiled, spoken with calm assurance, and how that smile had masked a calculating mind. The study fueled her determination. Palm wasn't simply about clearing her name, it was about exposing the manipulation, icing that Kane could no way hang her, her musketeers, or the Newman heritage again. Outside the courtroom, Genoa City buzzed. Media content was grim, social exchanges rampant, and the ripple goods of Kane's treason reached far and wide. Rumors swirled, alliances were tested, and the megacity inclusively awaited to see whether justice would prevail or if Kane's plots would stand unchallenged. During one critical session, crucial substantiations came forward, workers, former mates, and indeed a former associate of Kane's who had grown disabused with his ruthless ambition. Their testaments revealed a pattern of deception that gauged months, pressing not only Kane's particular treason but also his manipulation of commercial systems and legal loopholes. The courtroom was electric with pressure as substantiation mounted, each piece more ruinous than the last. Phyllis's heart contended as the narrative turned in her favor. Every taradiddle Kane had told, every manipulation he'd legislated, was exposed. Her legal platoon presented clear substantiation showing that Kane had orchestrated false documents, constrained substantiations, and abused his influence to fabricate a case against her. The room was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of the exposures. Kane's trim countenance faltered ever so slightly, and for the first time, a crack appeared in his precisely constructed armor. Victoria's eyes shone with the admixture of exculpation and anguish. She had trusted Kane, believed in his integrity, and the treason cut deeply. Yet witnessing the verity come to light reaffirmed her sense of justice. Nikki, ever the dame, quietly observed from the gallery, her expression an admixture of fury and pride, knowing that Phyllis's adaptability had turned the drift. In captivity, Phyllis remained alert, apprehensive that the legal battle was only one front. She continued to map, preparing for the moment when she could return to the megacity and reclaim her life. She studied the guards, learned routines, and gathered intelligence wherever possible, realizing that information was power, both outside and outside the captivity walls. Days turned into weeks. The trial progressed, And each day brought new exposures, testaments, cross-examinations, and the slow, regular dismembering of Cain's fossils created a narrative that was inarguable.